I'm Kim Early and this is Floral Art Review. This week we're looking at another of the all-around designs. We had a big response last week to the first of these designs that we did. This one is a little bit different. I think I talked last week about having that plinth that is supplied, that is the 60 centimetres square, and in last week's episode we could go outside of that. We had a metre square to use. This time around we only have that 60 centimetres. And whilst at the base it's easy to contain your design within that 60 centimetres squared, what you've got to also watch is as you go up higher, that the invisible line that goes up from the sides of that plinth, that your plant material doesn't come outside that, because that's what a judge will be looking for. They'll walk all around, they'll see if it looks like it overhangs that invisible line, and then you're not according to schedule. Not necessarily disqualified, but you might lose points or be downgraded a little bit. So this one, the title was Bark and Blooms, and so I think as I had in last week's, I used an upright piece of bark with a metal stand that sits inside it so I can put some other plant material around it. It's a beautiful piece of bark and I really enjoy using it, but it is very dominant. So this time around I've given you the two angles of the design so you can see what one side looked like compared to the other side. So I've used the upright bark. It's on a standard flat base, but it's got some bark around the base to disguise the actual painted base that's on the bottom there. It's got, in terms of the other plant material in there, there are some roses, some tulips, some proteas with their foliage, and then there is the cascading little ones, what's called a Chinese orchid. It's a flower that comes out late April, early May through to probably June. It's a quite a delicate, very profusely flowered at that time, but quite delicate and really good to use in designs where you want to layer or drape things across the design. So it's giving me that transition material that we'd like to see. It was, as I said, judged all around. This particular design didn't get a placing and I was quite mystified as to why. I thought I'd met the brief. I thought it was as good as any of the other designs that were in that particular class, but we don't get any feedback at this competition, and so I couldn't find out what it was, where I hadn't met the brief or where I hadn't met the design principles and elements. So I'm interested to see this time in this review what DesignEye, our AI, has got to say based on those principles and elements of design and the fact that it knows that this was judged all around. So I gave both the images to have a look at. So let's see what it's got to say. We look at the overall impression first of all. This is a strong sculptural design built around the commanding presence of vertical bark. The contrast between rugged timber and refined blooms is immediately engaging. The all-around presentation allows the viewer to experience shifting moments of weight, colour, concentration and textural interplay. So that's a pretty good summary. I'm wondering, when I look at these images now, whether that bark was just too dominant on that one side, whether it was just not enough there was not enough softening of it to complete the all-around impression of the design. But let's see what individually what AI's got to say for us. Dominance, first of all, the bark structure clearly establishes dominance. The upright timber form is bold, substantial and architectural. Its irregular surface texture creates immediate visual authority. The floral grouping reads as a secondary yet intentional counterbalance. From one angle, the bark reads as a powerful trunk. From the other, the blooms take greater prominence. This dual reading adds interest without losing structural clarity. So, to my mind, that's a clear analysis of the images that it's been presented with. But what it's also telling me is that there were two sides to this design, that there were two presentations of the design. So it wasn't coherent enough, I would say, in terms of the all-around presentation. And what I probably needed to do was bring more of that foliage back around the bark. And I could have done that. I could have draped it back around and more, and that would have cut that expanse with still maintaining the interest in that textural variation. but it would have brought the colour and the softening texture of the foliage around into that view, that part of the particular design. Balance for all-round judging. For a 360-degree design, balance is handled confidently. Visual weight is distributed through horizontal protea placements, settle rose mass, trailing material, bark fragments at the base. There is asymmetry, but it feels intentional rather than accidental. From the rear angle, the design remains visually engaging, not merely the back of the front. And I think that's true to a certain extent, but it could have been done better. And I think that's the area now that I look at the images where it's fallen down, because that front where the floral mass is so full of floral that it is a real contrast to the back that has very little other than the draping Chinese orchids. The comment about the visual weight being distributed through the horizontal protea placements, that's from the floral side of it. I wonder, and here again I'm going to have to be very careful about the invisible line for the edges of that space we're allowed to use, because I think I'm pretty close to being at the 60 centimetres on that particular angle. I wonder if I had not brought at least one of those proteas around to the bark side of the design, that would have helped with that visual flow, and it would still be, the visual way would still be distributed through it, but it's distributed in a different way because we've got that massive bright floral material at the top. If we had a protea coming down lower down into the bark side, that might help with that visual balance from the other side of the design. Movement is one of the strongest aspects of this design. The drooping orchid stems create downward visual flow. Asparagus-like foliage softens and diffuses at the hard edges. Horizontal protea heads extend the eye outward. Vertical bark reestablishes the upward pull. So that's an interesting analysis of the way our eyes move through the design, just purely by the form and the line that is created by those particular placements of the plant material. The eye travels up the bark, across the protea, into the rose mass, down through the orchids, back to the bark base. That cyclical movement works beautifully for all-round viewing. It does, but I could have done better. And I think that's what's coming through in this analysis, is that there were just a few small adjustments I needed to make to minimise the impact of the floral mass and maximise the movement through the design by slightly different placements of the plant material on the bark side. Proportion and scale. The proportion between bark and flowers is thoughtfully handled, just not well enough. The bark dominates without overwhelming. Have to disagree. Protea scale is appropriate to the structure. Rose cluster is dense but not congested. And that's an interesting one, because we often will mass flowers together, and if we get them too close together, it just looks like one big blob of colour or of form. And so we just need a little bit of space. Often it's just like a finger width in between the placements, so that you can actually get a little bit of air through. You still see the form, your eye still fills in the gap to some extent, but there is a place to rest, and not having them all on the same line or distance also helps, so that in and out placement gives you a little bit more leeway to rest your eyes and move through that area of the design. The bark dominates without overwhelming, as I said. Go back to the same one again. That's still worrying me. I think the bark does dominate, and I do think on that side of it, it is a little bit overwhelming. The more I look at it, the more I think, hey, I should have done something with that. The base bark pieces anchor the vertical form effectively and prevent top heaviness. They do on the flower side of it. On the bark side of it, it just looks like a continuation to me, and I just need something to break up that mass of very highly textural form that is there in terms of that bark placement. I shouldn't go back and look at designs. The more I look at them, the more unhappy I am with them. Texture. Texture is the defining feature. Contrasts include rough bark versus velvety rose petals, smooth protea bracts versus fibrous bark edges, fine airy foliage versus solid timber, cascading orchids versus ridges structure. This is textural storytelling done well. This is a design that was probably about 4 years ago, maybe 5 years ago. And I think that was at the time where I really decided that I was going to focus on texture. Texture was the thing that I felt most comfortable with in terms of comparative values in a design. And so it's good to see that I was very focused on it there. I did get that part of it right. It's just the relative amounts of textural contrast that perhaps need a little bit of adjustment. Colour harmony. The palette is rich and layered with deep red, soft blush protea, purple accents, fresh greens and warm neutral bark. The red mass of the roses obviously provides strong emotional intensity. The protea softens and expands that emotional temperature because the placement is outside of that main central area. So we're moving out in the design and we're moving out emotionally, softening the emotions from that central point. Purple accents link beautifully with bark crevices and the base elements. So the purple that they're talking about there is the Chinese orchids, because they're so tiny they can slip into the crevices of the bark, and this is where I could have done so much better with the placement of those on the bark side of things and really tempered the emotional journey that you go on through this design. Rhythm and repetition. Repetition of protea creates structural rhythm because they're a good dense flower and they create a good line. Orchids create hanging rhythm, punctuation. Bark texture provides constant visual repetition. That's very true. The rhythm is organic rather than geometric, which is appropriate for the theme. So what it's saying there is that the rhythm in the design that's created by those placements, it feels natural, rather than being a structure, a vertical structure, and then these other horizontal placements or diagonal placements that create distinct geometric lines. This is it gives you the impression of that structure without it being very rigid in terms of the line that your eye draws. Space. This design uses space effectively for an all-round piece. There is open negative space around the vertical bark, layered positive space within the floral mass, light penetration through the foliage. So this is about thinking in terms of incorporating space in your design, the negative space that we've talked about all the way through, as well as the positive space. And that's what I talked about with the placement of the roses, is that yes, we're going to mass that plant material there, but it's still got to have some space that belongs to it. It is not negative or empty space in the design. It's just part of the overall shape of that part of the design. So if we now look at, apart from the things that I've already noticed and talked about, things that we might improve in this design. Clarify one dominant floral focal zone. So I think, and it's not talking about a focal point, it's talking about a focal zone. So I think what I needed to do was extend the mass of those where the roses are placed, bring it down a little bit more into more of a teardrop shape, so that it enhanced the height that it's at, and that would be the focal zone on that side of it. Refine integration where mechanics meet bark. Must be able to see something I can't. In the design, it's probably to do with the structure, the stand that's inside of the bark. And that's a very valid point, and something that we all need to consider in every design, is we've just got to make sure that the mechanics aren't as obvious. Even though we take the photos and we look at it, we sort of blank out. As much as our eyes fill in the gaps in a design, it will blank out the things that we know are just there as part of holding it together. So mechanics are always something that I review at the end of a design, and I needed to have a bit closer look with this one before I let it go to judging. increase subtle repetition of accent colour vertically. So this is the red. So what it's talking about there is that the red or the purple, and let's go with the purple because I think the purple that's in the Chinese orchids is going to work better, is repeat those placements on the bark side. So I have them so that they're a little bit more obvious in a line that goes down, and perhaps it's a similar sort of spiral or a soft spiral, not a very obvious one, but one that travels through. Because that bark is so textured, I could have them tucked in underneath the bark and just peeking out. I could have them hanging down. So it gives the variation of the placements some importance, but it also accentuates that verticality of the design, but uses colour rather than the form of the bark. Slightly open the central rose cluster to enhance space. So it's feeling that it's still probably a little bit too densely packed. I need to open that up a bit more. And I think if I did the teardrop shape and loosened them up a little bit in that teardrop placement, that would certainly help that particular area as well. So there we have our analysis of bark and blooms. Lots for me to think about this week in terms of this design. I hope that's helped you in your floral art journey, giving you some things to think about. As always, if you'd like one of your designs analysed in this way, just go to the website and follow the instructions there. But for now, I'm Kim Bailey, and this is Floral Art Review.